Yes, people, what is going on? So, welcome back to the YouTube channel. It has been some time, but we're going to try and keep these vlogs rolling from now up until the end of prep, which will be starting this week. Only a couple of days away, so I thought this would be a nice kind of introduction video almost to the prep series, just wrapping up my entire off season, right? So, my off season was 30 months long. It's been a very, very long time, but I wanted to make this video just to kind of give people like an in-depth kind of analysis of everything I have done since I stepped off stage in 2020 up until my starting position for prep now. I knew when I stepped off stage in 2020 I needed to gain a lot of size and I needed to spend a very long time in an off season. So I know there's probably a lot of people who are in similar situations, or aspiring first time competitors who may be watching this who are wondering, do I have enough size yet to compete? Do I have to do a long off season to kind of get to where I want to be? And if so, what would that potentially look like? So I'm kind of putting this out there for educational purposes and for anyone who might be interested in my own journey to kind of get a little bit of an insight as to what I have done. Now, I will be sharing my dosages of all my steroid cycles that I have done in this video. So I just want to caveat by saying, please do not copy this, okay? If you're going to be going down the enhanced road, please hire a coach. Doesn't have to be me, but make sure you have guidance under somebody who knows what they're doing. These dosages are completely individual to me. They're individual to how I respond to certain compounds. They're individual to the blood work that I've received back, that I've gotten tested at different time periods during the course of this off season. So please do not try and copy what I've done here. There needs to be some sort of a duty of care on my part to kind of mention this, but also just don't be silly. This is for education purposes, and it's also to show people that you don't have to throw the kitchen sink at it with gear for your first show or for a very long time during your, I suppose, enhanced journey if you are going to go down that route. You will see from the time that I have spent building my way up to where I am now that my gear usage hasn't been ridiculous in any way, shape or form. I certainly don't think it is. I think I have been very sensible. I think I have approached things in the right way, and I'm hoping that by sharing this, it might kind of set a decent example for some other people to, kind of follow, but not exactly follow, as I mentioned earlier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap over to a Loom video now, just so I can bring the little timeline I've done up on my screen, and then I'm going to kind of compare and contrast pictures from the start and end of different phases, the whole way up from my competition prep up to where I am now. Welcome back. So I hope you're ready to buckle up, because I imagine this is going to be quite a long video, but if you are interested and if you are take the time to watch it, hopefully you will enjoy it, and hopefully you'll be as surprised with the transformation as I actually was. I didn't actually realize how far I've actually come until I started to go back this morning and put all these pictures together and kind of put them side by side. And I realized that, in the grand scheme of 2 or 2.5 years, which isn't really that long of a space of time in bodybuilding, the results have been quite promising. And like I said, in my opinion, the drug usage has been sensible. It has been titrated up accordingly based off where I've been at in my journey at certain stages. And that's what I'm going to take you through now, right? So let's just start off with our baseline, which is going to be my first timers show that I did. PCA first timers in Birmingham on the 10th of October 2020, right? So for this show, this was my cycle, right? I actually started off with 300 mg of Test-D and 150 mg of MAST, and that was for the first 6 weeks. After the first 6 weeks, we bumped the MAST up by 50 mg and we added in Clen. And then over the last 7 weeks, we added in 50 mg of Anavar, split AM and PM. AM pre-workout, and then PM at around 6 o'clock, okay? So I ended up being around 87 kg on stage, right? My prep low was 86.5, but I reckon after the carbo process, I was 87 on stage. I don't know exactly because I had no scales with me at the time, but this is pretty much what I ended up looking like, right? So all these pictures would have uploaded arseways, so the poses won't be in order, but we will take a look, right? So front double bicep here. What you'll notice in these pictures is from the front, I'm pretty much in, right? I'm pretty much probably as lean as I was going to get for this level of muscularity. But when you look at the side and the back shots, I still had a little bit more to come off. Like, legs are fairly peeled, you know, midsection's fairly peeled. As you can see here, 0 lats, still working on that. Side shots, you know, I do think the side of the leg and the obliques could have been a little bit more diced here, and obviously a lot more side needed. Side chest, same thing with the leg here. Back double biceps, you know, I think shoulders could have been a little bit leaner. The whole back in general could have been a little bit leaner, and I think a couple more lines in the glutes and a couple more lines in the hamstrings, and I would have been there. So it's hard to tell exactly, you know, how much I really needed to lose beyond that point. I reckon maybe 3 to 5 or 6 kilos, who knows. But I was pretty happy with this look for my first time being on stage. You know, I think especially with how low the gear I was running was, you know, no thyroid hormone, nothing like that. I got pretty lean and I was pretty happy with it, you know. So this was my prep. I was around 87 kg here. Now, before I done this prep, right, this prep was in, our competition was in October, 10th of October 2020. I started gear the year before, okay? So I actually started gear at the end of October 2019, right? I did kind of little small cycles on and off. I did 8 weeks of 250 mega test. Then I came off for 6 weeks. Then I did 9 weeks with like 250 test, 100 MPP, 100 mast. And then I came off for another good couple of weeks. And then I hopped back on for 20 weeks for this cycle. So why all that coming off after such short cycles? Reason was the timeline I had set out for my prep, and you know, the time I needed off in between those cycles. And also COVID hit the world at the start of 2021, and a lot of people came off cycle at that stage in order for them to, you know, not catch COVID and die, as that was what everybody thought was going to happen at the time. Now, after COVID, it was a little bit of a perfect storm, or after my competition, it was a little bit of a perfect storm. So we went into the second lockdown literally like a week after I'd done my competition prep. So that meant the gyms were closed the whole way up until December. Then they opened for 4 weeks in December, and then they closed again. Okay. So during this space of time of 18 weeks, the gyms were only open for like 4 weeks. Okay. And because the gyms weren't open, my coach at the time didn't really want me to hop on cycle. So I actually stayed on 125 mega testy, just complete TRT replacement dose for this period of time. Now, looking back on this was a monumental waste of my time, as at the beginning of January, I did find somewhere to train that was fairly decently equipped. So, you know, I just basically wasted 6 weeks here of just doing absolutely nothing, right? So obviously that led me to kind of, amongst other reasons, switch coaches. And I started with Kuba in March, right? So just before I started with Kuba, I did actually hop back on cycle. 300 meg of test, 300 meg of MPP, and 200 meg of mast. So this was a little bit of a step up for me at the time. You know, 500 megs was the most I'd ever run, and I did that for a full entire year. Okay, like between 250 to 500 milligrams was all I ran for my whole first year on cycle. From there, then bumped that up to 700 megs. I started with Kuba, and this is pretty much what I looked like, right? So I'll actually show you what I looked like at the end of the cruise, after that disastrous, you know, couple of months. So from peeled competition prep to, you know, chunky, out of shape, hadn't really been going to the gym because the gyms were closed, but, you know, I just looked absolutely terrible, right? Leave the haircut alone. I thought I was going to, you know, grow a man bun and tie it up when I was in lockdown. I got a couple of notions there, but yeah, it is what it is, right? So started with Kuba then at the beginning of March, and what we did was get me straight into a minicut, okay? This is the priming phase. We wanted to get the body back lean so that we had time to basically push up and actually make the most out of this cycle. So from those pictures you just seen, we cut down to 92 kilos, right? So 6.9 kg gone in 7 weeks. When I started with Kuba, you know, we kept the cycle the same, but we just swapped the mast out for Primo, and then we added Clen in at 40 micrograms, you know, halfway through the mini cut, and then we bumped it up to 80 for the last week or two, right? This was the result of that initial mini cut phase, and this is what I look like. So I actually think I look pretty good here, right? So I actually got back to, you know, resembling some sort of a physique with decent shape, okay? These pictures are very washed out here, but you get the idea, okay? I kind of lost that unnecessary body fat that I gained over the lockdowns and over my kind of issues with food post show. And I tidied up a lot, and I kind of set good habits. I start with Kuba. He kind of straightened me out a good bit, sorted out my execution, sorted out kind of like my meal timings, the structure to my day, my routine, and I became very, very militant from that point onwards. Not to say I wasn't, super militant and disciplined in my competition prep, but this was a whole other level. Okay, I started acting like a proper bodybuilder, and this was the result after only 7 weeks. Now, we did push very hard during this time frame. I believe my rest day calories were at like 2,000, which was actually lower than my rest day calories were at the end of my prep. But we got the job done regardless, and I got back in good shape. So from there, we had 10 weeks left in this push-up phase. So, we pulled out the clean and stuck with the 300 test, 300 MPP and 200 Primo. And then for the last 4 weeks of this cycle, we bumped it up to 400 mg of Primo. So as you'll see, this is the first time during my journey I've gone beyond 1 gram of gear. Okay, this is 1100 milligrams of gear, so 1.1 grams. And this was on the 21st of June, 2021. And like I said, I started in October, right? So this was like 20 months later, okay? So that's a very long period of time, right? 20 months not even going beyond a gram of gear. And actually, if you just discount this last 4 weeks, I didn't go beyond a gram again until the 18th of October 2022, which actually would have marked 2 years on gear, right? So, for the sake of 4 weeks, I basically didn't go above a gram of gear for 2 years. So that's something I really wanted to highlight in this video. And, I was still able to make considerable progress. I put on probably more muscle then than I have during my last push-up. So the progress was, by no means weak. It wasn't that I wasn't taking enough. I was faffing about. I should have, pushed things up, much quicker and much harder. I certainly don't think so. I think those dosages at that time for where my physique was at and how much I actually needed for me to grow were absolutely perfect. Okay, I actually think I could have grown on even less than that. So that's just something for, any kind of young guys out there watching or anyone who's looking to go down this road. You do not need to be coming out of the gate with 500 mega test and 500 mega deca. Okay, you just don't need to be doing it, because all you're going to end up is you're going to be like a walking side effect pretty much, and you're not going to be able to assess how you actually respond to these compounds. If you start small and you slowly build up, you'll be able to identify side effects as they start to come in, and you'll be able to kind of get your bloods done, adjust things, and be sensible with it. Okay, so this was what I looked like at the end of my very first push-up. Okay, so this was after, Kuba took the reins. Picture on the left, obviously, is the end of my mini-cut. Picture on the right is like 10 weeks later, and I'm actually, much heavier here. I think the difference is like 8 or 9 kilos, and I do not look like I've changed at all. Okay, I do not look like I'm 8 or 9 kilos up. There's no difference, very minimal difference in between these photos, except the fact that I just look slightly fatter and slightly softer. Maybe the back shot is, a little bit better, but at this early stage of my journey, once I started to gain a little bit of body fat during the push-up phase, I didn't really see the fruits of my labor until I cut back down, which is what you're going to see now when I take you through the next tidy ups. But this was my, very kind of first push up of the off season, and you kind of look at these pictures and you go, is he even after making any progress whatsoever? You're 8 or 9 kilos up, you just look softer, you just look fatter. What was the point in that? You should have taken more drugs, etc., etc. But when you actually see me cut down and do the next tidy up, you'll actually see that I look a lot better than I do on those pictures on the left there. Okay, so from that point, we entered back into a cruise. We did a 5.5 week mini cut. This cruise was a modified cruise, so it was a little bit higher than I was used to. Again, I had been on gear for 23 months here, and I decided, look, I'm going to have to start bridging with maybe a little bit of higher of a dose, which I know I tolerate quite well, so I can hold on to a little bit of muscle, make more progress, because ultimately my long-term goals are big and they're important to me, right? But my first while I stayed on the real legit TRT doses during my cruise. So 275 mg test a week. At this point, we implemented some GH and just 40 micrograms of clen. So managed to pull off, a couple of kg there towards the end of that phase. And this is pretty much what I looked like then after that, right? So you can see here,
looking at like my glutes here and like just my back and shoulders, there definitely seems to be a small little bit more density here. Even if you look at my quads from the front, my quads are lean, but they're a lot fuller and bigger than they were in those last Minicut photos. So although I look like I barely changed in those photos on the left when I pushed up after the last Minicut, when I dropped only 3.5 kilos this time around, it made a huge difference to what my physique actually looked like. And obviously, you know, these pictures aren't the best because they're in different kind of spots, but the physique looked a hell of a lot better than it did the last time I had cut down. And obviously, you know, I was substantially heavier. I was about 5 kg heavier in these pictures on the right than I was with the pictures in the white jocks, okay? So that was my first kind of real time seeing like, oh, okay, I'm only after dropping like 3 kilos and I actually look a little bit different. You know, this is good. So from there, we bumped the food up a little bit. We started the next push-up phase at 98.8 kg. And then we started going at things just a little bit more aggressively. Right, so 437.5 mega test, 437.5 mega primo. My dosages were every other day at the time, so that's why these are very strange numbers. And 2, I use a GH. You know, as this cycle progressed, we obviously had some cycle progressions here. So September to October, you know, after 3 weeks, I bumped the primo up and the GH up. You know, after another couple of weeks, I bumped the primo up again. After another couple of weeks, I bumped the primo up again, and we had some, you know, insulin, basal insulin, and you know, fast-acting insulin in pre and post workout. And from there, I gained, you know, a decent chunk of weight, and I went up to 103.5 kilos. Now, this push-up was only 16 weeks in duration because I actually had some really, really bad kind of like fatigue and energy issues during this time frame. You know, not to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I got my COVID vaccine and I'm convinced I got long COVID from the COVID vaccine, okay? My sleep scores were terrible. My recovery was terrible. Everything went out the window. During the last couple of weeks here, right, after I took this cycle progression, I believe over Christmas, the last 2 weeks of December and the first week of January, I took like almost completely off the gym. I think I did like 3 sessions in those 3 weeks. And from there, this entire 4-week cruise that I took, I did devolume sessions the whole time. And this first week of the next push-up, I did devolume sessions. So I had to take 3 full weeks off the gym and I had to do 5 weeks of devolume sessions. Not a good time in my journey, but it taught me a lot about kind of dealing with setbacks. Now, despite all of this, even though this was my least successful push-up of the off-season, I had to cut it short because my body was just fucked and it wasn't responding. My weight wasn't really going up. As you'll see here, 98.8 up to 103. It's like the least amount I've actually gained in any of my push-ups. Body just was fucked. But despite all of that, looking at these pictures when I was looking back, I actually made some decent progress. Okay, so these are, you know, start of the push-up 98.8 to end of the push-up. So this is the first time where I kind of started to look like I looked a little bit different at the end of the push-up. If you look at these photos, you'll notice that even though I'm like 5 or 6 kg up, I actually don't really look like my condition has suffered. If anything, I look slightly leaner. And this is a common trend you're going to see from every single push-up that I've done from this point onwards. Every single push-up I've done in the last like year and a half, I've started in a leaner position and I've actually ended in a leaner position than I did my previous push-up. So every single time I'm getting bigger and I'm getting leaner. So even though the weight gain might be slowing down on my push-ups, I think the quality of the tissue I'm putting on is actually much greater. Okay, so this is pretty much what I look like afterwards. You know, minor differences, but again, for like 5 or 6 kg up here, it's not the same difference that you would have seen before. You know, when I kind of showed the last push-up photos, I gained like 8 kilos. I just looked fatter and softer. Here, I actually do look bigger, and I actually do like look, I'm more vascular here. You know, I've got a little bit more thickness to the leg, and things actually look like they have been happening. Okay, I look like a recreational gym lifter at this stage. So that was that push-up. Again, not a very successful push-up, but it was what it was. Okay, now beyond this point, once I kind of got my body back right, we entered into push-up number 3. So this was extremely productive. Okay, during this time frame, I also moved over to Manchester at the beginning of May, and I was in a really good momentum before I left. And obviously, then when I got over here from May until the middle of July, that 10-week period, I made a ton of progress. And you're going to see from the end of this mini cut to the kind of end of this push-up, I gained like 10 kg here. Okay, I gained 10.3 kg, which is a massive, massive chunk to gain in the space of 19 weeks. And you can actually see some really noticeable differences in my physique here. So first, I'll show you what I kind of look like from start of that phase to the end with regards to the mini cut. So this is my third push-up. This is what I look like at the beginning of that push-up, and this is what I look like at the end. So here we can see that now these mini cuts are really, really starting to take shape, and we're really starting to see the differences. So much tighter in the midsection here, arms actually look bigger, much more vascular, legs are pretty lean, right? And midsection so much tighter, abs look good. Definitely a lot more kind of shape to my physique now, a lot more pop to my physique now, and you can see that I'm pretty lean. Okay, I'm much leaner than I would have been in previous mini cuts, and I didn't even have to drop a crazy amount of weight or mini cut for that long. I think this mini cut was only like 4 weeks. Okay, so this was very successful considering the time frame. I think I pulled off like 7 kg or something along those lines in the space of 4 weeks. So 104.3 down to 96.9 in 4 weeks. So really short, really snappy, and I think the benefit of this was huge. And as you can see here, this time we implemented some tren, we implemented T4, and we implemented T3, kind of just above a replacement dosage here, right? So we kind of came out of the gate much more aggressively with the kind of anabolics and the ancillaries, and that obviously drove the fat loss much, much quicker, right? So during that second push-up, I had gone above a gram. As you can see here, I started on around 860, and I ended up there at around 1400. Okay, or not 1400, sorry, that's 1200, right? So bumped it up by about 400 milligrams as we moved along. This cruise again was quite high, but I was only taking some recovery before I went back to the push-up. 350 test, 175 primo, probably actually the craziest cruise I've ever done, if you want to call it that. And then push-up number 3 from the beginning of 2022, up until the midway point of 2022, we did take things up a notch, right? So as you can see here, I started off this cycle with a total of around 950 milligrams of gear, and I ended up with a total of around 750. Okay, so we progressively bumped this up by 800 milligrams as we move along. As you can see here as well, my test got quite high, so my test got up to 525 milligrams of test. Again, I stayed at 300 for the longest time, stayed at 300 for like the first 2 years. Then I kind of bumped it up to 4, and now bumped it up to kind of 5. And the primo is kind of like the base of, not the base, but it's the majority of all my cycles. It's what makes up the most amount of them, because it is fairly well tolerated, and it's a pretty kind of safe compound to have in there in comparison to some other harsher compounds, right? As we can see here, once we completed that mini cut, we pulled out the thyroid hormone, we bumped the food up, we added the Lantus back in, we kept actually T4 in at a replacement dosage, and from here we kind of stayed at this dose for about a month, and then from there we bumped the test up, bumped the primo up, and we added in some NPP. Okay, so 350 milligrams of NPP in at that stage, and we would have ran that then for, I think that was actually 100 meg of NPP at this stage, and then we bumped it up to 350. So we stayed at that dosage for about a month, and then from there 525 test, 787.5 primo, 350 meg of NPP, GH was up to 4 units a day, T4 in at replacement dose, Lantus at 10, Novat 5IU pre and post, and we ran that for the last 5 weeks. So this push-up, it was my quickest and most successful mini cut. Obviously, as you can see, with that starting point, I was quite lean, certainly leaner than I'd ever been after any other mini cut. And from there, we actually had a full 19 weeks to push up. So in previous push-ups, my first push-up after mini cut, I had 10 weeks to push up. My second push-up, yes, I had 16 weeks, but body wasn't very responsive. This time, because the mini cut was so short and sweet, we had 19 weeks to progressively stay in a surplus, progressively bump our drugs up, and this is the result of that cycle. So this was when things started to kind of really come along and really push along. And this is when I started to be like, okay, right, you're actually making some real progress now. You're actually getting places. Okay, you actually look like a semi bodybuilder now. So you're probably looking at these photos and you're probably thinking, there's not a huge difference between those, but just keep in mind that yes, I'm much fatter on the right here, not much fatter, but I'm considerably, softer, but I'm like 10 kg up. Okay, so how could I look like I've gained 3 or 4 kg of body fat, maybe a little bit more, but be 10 kilos up? As you can see here, the legs probably look just as lean, arms probably look just as lean. It's just the chest and the midsection that's a little bit softer. But when you look to some of the other shots, like if you look to these side shots here, the front shot, like there's very little difference really in body comp, but you can see lats are much bigger here. The shoulders have more popping around us to them. The arms actually look bigger. The legs look bigger. Pretty much everywhere grew systemically this time around. The glutes much bigger, adductors. I kind of blew up during this push-up phase. So, the drugs certainly do work, but at the same time, I wasn't experiencing any issues this time around, okay? The world wasn't in lockdown. I wasn't training in a fucking shed, okay? I actually moved over to Manchester, started training in FLF with a host of much, much better equipment. So this push-up, everything ran smoothly, okay? Now, the only thing that I really struggled with during this push-up was actually taking my body to this weight. It was something I'd never experienced before any other time I'd ever done a gaining phase. I spent so long pushing up and progressively eating so much food and training so hard and everything else that I got hit really, really hard with this push-up. To this date, it's been the hardest push-up that I've actually ever done. You can see here in the back, huge difference in thickness there. Rear delts, erectors, traps, even though I'm carrying a little bit more body fat, glutes much bigger. Calves even look bigger slightly. But yeah, I really struggled during this push-up with the kind of volume of food that I actually had to eat. And, for the last 8 weeks, 9 weeks of that push-up, I was really fucking struggling, man. It was a daily battle to get my meals in, and it was the most uncomfortable I have ever been in my whole entire life. I think why this last push-up phase wasn't as uncomfortable is because I spent a little bit longer in a mini-cut. I had a little bit less time to kind of push up. My food stayed a little bit lower for a little bit longer. And also, it wasn't in the middle of summer with, 30 degree heat and heat waves happening all the time. So I really did struggle during that push-up phase. But as you can see from those pictures, it definitely was worthwhile. Okay, so the more uncomfortable that you become, sometimes the more progress you make. And bodybuilding is all about learning to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if you don't want to be uncomfortable, if you don't want to shove meals into you 6 times a day when you're not hungry for any of them, then bodybuilding just ain't for you. You're not going to make progress. And look, the proof is in the pudding. 19 weeks, 10 kilos up, and barely any difference in body composition, right? So that takes us up to the midway point of 2022. As you can see here, I entered back into a cruise. For the first 2 or 3 weeks of this cruise, it was 200 mega test, 100 mega primo, 4 UGH, 100 micrograms T3, and then we still had Atlantis in play. Atlantis got pulled for the final 2 weeks of this holiday as I actually was on holidays in Croatia at the time. I thought this would be brilliant. I'll take 2 weeks off. I'll go on a holiday. I won't train that much. I'll eat a load of shit. It's going to be fantastic. It's going to be a mental and physical reset. It actually turned out to be the opposite. I actually fucking hated my life. I hated the fact I couldn't train. I hated the fact I was out of my routine. I hated the fact I couldn't eat my boring chicken and rice meals. And it ended up being the complete antithesis of what I thought it was going to be. So I won't be doing that again. I'll be sticking to my routine and my chicken and rice. And if I go on holidays, it's going to be somewhere with good gyms and good supermarkets. Okay, so the goal of that cruise was obviously to drop out the drugs, get healthy, but it was also to maintain my body weight. Okay, I had built so much muscle during that third push-up and during that time frame that I really needed to solidify that weight before I kind of drop back down into a mini cut to do my final push-up before prep. Okay, so that 5 weeks was about holding on to body weight, which I did do. As you can see, I was 107.2 at the end of that phase, and when I started my next push-up, I was 107.15. Okay, so pretty much the exact same weight on average for those kind of 7 weeks. When we started this fourth push-up, It took me a little bit longer to get into the swing of things. As you can see, this is my longest mini cut I've done. My first mini cut, it said 7 weeks, but I think it was actually 6.5 weeks. Second mini cut, 5.5 weeks. Third one, like 4 weeks. And this one actually took 7 weeks because being away, being in Croatia, eating dinner out every single night, not being able to train, I was completely out of my routine and my body just didn't respond like it normally did when I got back, right? So we needed to spend a little bit longer of a time in that phase to pull off what we needed to pull off. So as you can see here, again, I dropped around 7-ish kilos, but it took me 7 weeks. Previously, it only took me 4 weeks, okay? Now, we did come out of the gate again with the drugs a lot higher this time, and we ended a lot higher, okay? So this 4-up push-up phase, I'll have no issue in saying that the drugs here are high, okay? I was pushing it at this stage, and if you look at this and you think that 2 grams of gear at the end of the cycle isn't a lot of gear, then you're sorely mistaken. Okay, it is a lot of gear. Now keep in mind, this is me like so long into my journey at this point. As I mentioned, didn't go above a gram for like 2 years, and then I was probably between a gram and 1500 for a good time period after that. And this is so far down the line from when I actually started, right? It's like over 3 years. Okay, so I've built up nice and slowly and progressively to this point. The level of muscle mass that I carry now kind of warrants the higher gear usage. And again, everything is dependent on how my blood work looks. I take all my health supplements, etc., etc. So yeah, if you're watching this, just keep that in mind. Now, started off this cycle 300 mg Testi, 700 Primo, 100 mg Tren A, and 100 mg of NPP. GH at 4IU, again, came out of the gate with the thyroid hormone here, and halfway through that initial kind of 7 weeks, we bumped the Primo up to 900 milligrams. So, like I said, we dropped, again, 7 kilo there, and to be honest, this was probably my favourite look of my physique ever. Like I said, this third push-up phase was the most productive one I'd done so far. It was the first one where I experienced no issues. It's the first one where I did a really good productive mini cut that didn't last that long and where I had plenty of time to push up. Like I said, I spent a lot of time being really, really uncomfortable. Even holding that body weight here was super uncomfortable. It was really difficult. I felt like shit. I had no energy, etc., etc. But once I stripped off the body fat, my God, did I see the benefits of that. So this was the most recent mini cut I've done, and this is pretty much the result of it. So first photos here is my lovely blonde hair that I dyed before I went to Croatia. Second photo is the end of mini cut. So as you can see on the right here, just a completely different level of muscularity and a tad more maturity to my muscles. You can actually see the adductor and even the hamstring detail here. The thickness in my back, the kind of lines in my shoulders, even my lats look like a lot bigger here. So I made substantial progress here. Quarter turns actually kind of looking decent. Hamstring came up a lot. My legs actually came up a ton during that push-up phase. And again, I probably put that down to, a lot of the equipment I've been using over here in FLF. Some more shots like front double bicep. Again, stomach probably the tightest it's been since I've been on stage. Quads much bigger. Arms semi-arming now at this stage, but still not quite there yet. And you'll notice that I have certain body parts that tends to get super lean super quick when I mini cut, right? My quads, my midsection come in really, really quick. It's my back that takes the longest to come in. Like you can see my front shot here. The difference in my midsection, the difference in my quads, even my chest here, is night and day. But my back tends to carry a little bit more body fat and be a little bit stubborn and take much longer to actually play ball. So when we kind of look at some of my back shots, like you can see here, the difference on where I was on the left, like back holding a ton of fat, and here actually looks like I have a back. Again, the glutes, the tie-in between the glute and the hamstring and everything else, everything just kind of looks like it fits together much better, only just because it's much bigger. And I made a lot of progress during that phase, right? So I was super happy with how I actually looked during this mini cut, even though it did take a long time to kind of strip down that weight and I wasn't that responsive for a while. When I actually did strip down, it was the kind of confirmation that I really needed to see that all that like suffering in the previous push-up had been worth it. And I think I really carried that kind of through into this last push-up, and this last push-up, I've, no doubt was my most successful yet. So this push-up after that mini cut, we ran it for 18 weeks. Now, during that time frame, I was traveling. I was over in Vegas as well, and I lost my suitcase and I didn't have my gear for a week as well. So, there was that. But it was still super successful. Training was still on point. Nutrition was still on point. Like I said, this push-up was a lot easier than the previous push-up. I felt a lot better as I've gone into my cruise now before prep, which I'm still on for the next couple of days. I feel the best I have felt in a very, very long time. So I think my body is just kind of starting to get used to being a little bit bigger now. And I think as well, this cycle setup this time around was a little bit better. I think the 350 meg of MPP at the end of that last push-up was probably just not agreeing with me as much of the lower dose of MPP and the lower dose of Tren did this time. So look, it goes without saying, we pushed the drugs a lot harder this time, which is probably why I've made the most progress I ever have during this push-up phase. But even with that aside, my routine, my training, my recovery has actually been the best it's ever been during this push-up. So that's also something you do need to take into consideration as well. So as you'll see from the cycle progressions here, we actually bumped the GH up to 6 units here as well. Bumped the Primo up, bumped the Primo and test up, bumped the Primo and test up again, MPP up a bit, and added the insulin back in, and bumped that insulin up to 20 with the Lantus. We did the last, the last 8 weeks of this phase, was pretty high. It was 2 grams of gear. Okay, we did 500 meg of tests for the 6 weeks, and then for the last 2 weeks we did 600 meg of tests. And I think this was only kind of just as a trial run to see if I could tolerate it for prep with the way my cycle was kind of set up here, and I tolerated it pretty well, right? So this is pretty much the results of this latest push-up, right? And as you'll see, again, as I mentioned earlier, the starting position of this push-up is the leanest I've ever been after a mini cut, and the end position of this push-up is the leanest I've ever been after a push-up. So one more thing I want to mention is that during my third push-up here, I went obviously from 96 kg to 107 kg, so I gained about 10 kg, and that was a lot, right? But I looked pretty soft at the end of it. This time around, I went from 99.8 kg up to 108 kg, right? So I gained 8 kg, or 9 kg, I should say, which is similar. It's only 1 kg less than I gained the last time. But when you look at the difference in leanness in these pictures, you know that there's been more muscle built during this phase than there was in the last, right? Because you look at these two pictures, and we looked at some really old pictures earlier, and I'm 8 kg up and you can barely see the difference, right? In these photos here, I think I look pretty fucking lean still, and I'm like 9 kg up, okay? So picture to the left and picture to the right, there's like 9 kilos in the difference. Obviously here my stomach isn't as tight, shoulders aren't as capped, chest isn't as flat, but my legs, my quad sweep is much bigger, my hamstring is much bigger. I think my arms have come up a lot. When you look at pretty much all shots, you can see the difference in the arms, kind of, I think that's definitely been a massive kind of point that I've really focused on to bring up in this entire off season, but even more so in this last push up. Legs, hamstring again come up a nice bit, I believe. And looking at this front shot, my front generally tends to be my leanest body part, so I still think it's pretty lean on the right hand side here. But again, like even looking at my quads here, I know I'm carrying more body fat on the right, but I think I've put on a nice bit of muscle this time around. And obviously this is the last push up before I actually do enter into the prep, so I would have wanted to have put on the muscle that I needed to put on. Back shot again, this generally tends to be the fattest. You can kind of see the folds there over my fingers. This back shot I think still looks pretty good, all things considered. This generally tends to be very fat at the end of my phase, but again, 9 kg in the difference here. And when you go back and you kind of look at my other mini cuts, you might look at these photos and think, they pretty much look the same, right? There's 9 kg in the difference. They look fairly similar, blah, 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 blah. And yes, that may be the case, but when I actually do mini cut this time around, I guarantee you the difference would be pretty big. Because anytime, like even when I did that last mini cut, I was actually, quite surprised by how I actually ended up towards the end of it. Like this mini cut here, like initially as I started to come down, I was like, oh my god, I look terrible. I don't look how I thought I would look. But then when I did actually get to the end of it, and I seen the difference from this point here on the left to here. Okay, so if I looked like this on the left here, and I dropped like 8 kilos, and I looked like this, imagine what it's going to look like when this photo here drops 8 kilos. Like what am I going to look like then? Am I going to look the same as I done here? I really don't think so. I think it will be much improved. Now that takes us up to pretty much now. Okay, so obviously I finished up that push up in February, and the 26th of March, today is the 22nd, is when I will end this cruise. Now I have peaked at 110.1 kilos. That was my body weight yesterday. Let's not talk about the fact I'm back in the 109s today. Every other body weight you have seen on this entire sheet, bar the one from stage and bar the end of mini cut ones, have been average body weights. So this here, like where I end my push-up, 108.7, that is my average across the week. 107.2, that is my average across the week. Similarly, that 104.3 from when I started, that is my average across the week. This is not an average across the week. My highest average across the week at the end of the cruise has been 109.4. So I am actually, a little bit up from where I was at the end of this push-up. But I think this phase has been so successful, and my training has been so good, and I feel so much better that even taking 300 tests and 50 primo, I have been making considerable progress during this cruise. And this is where I'm sitting now. These are the most recent photos, just before I start prep. So again, I still think these are pretty decent, especially considering I'm mid 109s here. Heaviest I've ever been, biggest I've ever been, obviously by far. And the weak points, like the arms, that I've really been trying to bring up this off season, are certainly starting to get there. Okay, obviously wonky back pose there. I can never get into those as the body fat starts to creep up. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to peeling this down, and actually seeing what we're working with underneath. So that's pretty much it, guys. So hopefully I didn't ramble on too long in this video. I hope you did enjoy it though. I hope you did find it useful. And yeah, any kind of questions, guys, if you are watching this with regards to any of the information I kind of put off this, when to minicut, how long you should off season for, anything on drugs, etc., please do drop me a message on Instagram, and I will try and help any of you guys out, especially you younger guys, so you don't go off and do anything silly, as I see a lot of people do a lot of silly things these days. So yeah, that is pretty much it, people. I will wrap that up there, and I will catch you in the next one.